China and ASEAN Foreign Minister Meeting. It's a first of its kind for the past couple of years. This is convened outside the regular schedule of ASEAN and official meetings. So why now? Why ASEAN member propose such a meeting at this point of time? Let me start with you, Professor Wang.
Well, I think this is like a Chinese philosopher indicates that we should focus on the common ground. That China-ASEAN, no territory dispute, no any historic problem, only with some ASEAN member countries. So we should separate this. At the same time, China and ASEAN focus on stability, peace in the South China Sea. This benefits all. I think this is the common ground we should highlight. At the same time, this 25 years anniversary of bilateral relations with ASEAN, and then September we'll have a summit. And so this is a special Foreign Minister Conference is also prepared for that. China-ASEAN, we highlight the importance as the community of mutual common interests and with a common responsibility and common destiny. So this is the signal sent to the world.
Professor Heydarian joining us there in Manila. Your thoughts on this? What was the Philippines hoping to achieve through this special meeting?
Well, as far as I know, the meeting was initiated by Malaysia around February, and the purpose of this meeting was for ASEAN countries as a whole to communicate to China that what we want to happen in the South China Sea is to de-escalate the disputes and make sure that disputes do not get out of control and do not compromise the overall positive character of ASEAN-China relations. If you talk about trade, of course, China is the #1 trading part of ASEAN, and there's hope that in terms of investment in infrastructure, China will play a more important role. But I think it also has to do with the fact that there's a genuine worry among many ASEAN countries, particularly Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines, and Vietnam, that the disputes are reaching a very dangerous stage. And of course, with the Philippines arbitration verdict coming on soon, I think there's a sense of urgency that together ASEAN and China should find a peaceful way to manage these disputes.
Well, you just laid it out for us. The South China Sea issue has been a focal point for regional tension and, frankly speaking, has become this diplomatic headache for China and ASEAN countries. Let me bring in Professor Lim there from Singapore. What do you make of the meeting's results on controlling tensions on this matter? Do you think that any concrete, significant progress has been made?
I think, first of all, it's important to know the purpose of this special meeting. And the purpose of this special meeting is twofold. One is to discuss about the preparatory work for the 25th anniversary of ASEAN-China dialogue relations, and to have some communications over the preparatory stage. The other one is to have a discussion on developments in the South China Sea. And most countries, all countries involved, believe that peace and stability in the South China Sea region is positive and also good for the region as a whole. So these are the two discussion points, and that was what the purpose of the meeting was for.
Let's come back to the issue of South China Sea. Now, many foreign ministers actually pushed for an early adoption of this code of conduct, a legally binding and effective code of conduct. But the talks has been really slow over the years. Professor Wang, what's the major sticking point here?
Well, it's a great improvement from the DOC to COC, because the DOC in many Chinese eyes, it just want to limit to China. It's just a declaration, no legal binding. So COC negotiation, mostly important, I think, obstacle is that cannot constrain United States, which is the most powerful nation in this region. Even it's not an Asian country. So that's the reason it's only combined ASEAN country and China. But this is maybe a future potential obstacle and problem.
Professor Heydarian, how powerful will this code of conduct be? Because the DOC now we have, it's not a legally binding agreement. It only aims to ease tensions, but not resolving this underlying conflict. It also lacks a dispute settlement mechanism. So how influential will a code of conduct be on that front?
Right. I mean, it has been more than 14 years since the signing of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, and there's a sense that not only are we lagging behind times and developments on the ground in terms of adopting a legally binding code of conduct, but it seems the very spirit of the Declaration of the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea is not also being respected. I mean, depending on what country you ask, I think all of us agree that certain claimant states are engaging in unilateral actions or are engaging in actions that go against the very spirit of the Declaration and Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. There's also hope that certain claimant states are resorting to force or threatening the usage of force. So it seems that the DOC itself is not being respected. In my opinion, COC is important in principle, but I think what's more urgent for us to have right now is a total freeze on reclamation activities, not only by China, but also by some ASEAN countries who have been also accused of being engaged in reclamation activities. I think all parties, including China, should refrain from unilateral actions that will jeopardize regional security. And I think it's very important that no country, especially China, will not impose any exclusion zone or air defense identification zone in the area. I think that should be the priority right now. And then in addition to that, I think we also have to find a common stance on how do we make sure that our claims in the area are consistent with prevailing international law, not historical claims that are not backed up by evidence or are not consistent with prevailing international law.
I want to give a chance to Professor Wang to make a response to what's just been said. What do you make of the accusation that has been made toward China's activity in the contested waters?
Well, we know that the Philippines sued this case to the arbitration court. Actually, this is not the standing court. It's just because of the Philippines unilaterally demand. And then because of, in this case, Japanese support, some judges still working. And also because of the Philippines will have the political changing. So this is political game. It's not just the particularly focused on the stability and peace in the South China Sea. At the same time, the international law not to tell you which island, I said, belongs to whom. You cannot do this. So the Philippines want to use this unilaterally, want to challenge the Chinese so-called night dash lines, and then to in favor of their sovereignty claim. This is, I think, we should make it clearly.
Professor Heydarian, a political game, is that what you would call it? And what do you make of China's stance that it's saying that Philippines' move actually violates the UN clause and the DOC? Professor Heydarian,
yes,
you go ahead.
I think I encourage our good friends in China to read the press release that came out from the Permanent Court of Arbitration last October, which clearly said that, first of all, the Philippines arbitration case does not have to do anything with sovereignty claims. I think your guest from China is absolutely right. UNCLOS does not have a mandate on sovereignty claims. But the Philippines case is not about sovereignty. It's about maritime entitlement claims. It's about the regime of islands and determination of what kind of land features are we fighting over. And it's also about whether countries can exercise their sovereign rights within their exclusive economic zone. And the Philippines has already passed the admissibility and jurisdiction question. So what we are waiting right now is verdict. In my opinion, the thing is this arbitration case should not be a basis for greater conflict between Philippines and China. I think it should be a basis for the two countries to move forward. And we know that this arbitration case will not be a game changer. It will be only one step in the direction of resolving these disputes peacefully. But again, as also mentioned a while ago, the Philippines will have a new president, so that also injects some sort of uncertainty and possible changes in how the Philippines approaches the South China Sea dispute.
Some uncertainty indeed, and we can see that the Sino-Philippine tension continues to amplify ahead of this impending ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Let me bring in Professor Lim, joining us there from Singapore. Well, Singapore is not a claimant of the South China Sea. As an observer, how do you feel this case between China and the Philippines?
Well, I think the meeting mentioned three very important points. The first point is that the ASEAN ministers noted the concerns about the developments in the South China Sea. And the second point is that they stress on maintaining peace and stability in South China Sea. And also the development to have peace based on legal as well as diplomatic processes. So that was the second point that was discussed. And for the third point that was discussed, it is hope that there can be a peaceful resolution to the disputes. So collectively, both ASEAN and China hopes that these 3 points can be resolved. These are long-standing issues. They can't be resolved instantly. Hopefully with dialogue, hopefully with exchanges and opinions, such issues can be discussed frankly. And also over time, there can be some agreements on certain points related to the issue, like maritime conservation, joint issues about handling maritime criminal activities on the sea, and all these are mentioned in the Code of Conduct. So the meeting in that way is useful to discuss all these points frankly and to push for the development and implementation of the Code of Conduct with gradual understanding.
Okay, we want to also take a look at the economic side, right? I want to read this to our viewers first and to all of you. China has been the largest trading partner for ASEAN bloc. In 2016, it's seen China and ASEAN's cooperation entering its 25th year, with increasing trade volume being a major goal for both sides. China is the largest trading partner of ASEAN, as I mentioned, and in 2015, trade volume between China and ASEAN countries reached $472 billion US. An Indonesian official says the two sides plan to raise trade volume to $1 trillion US by the year 2020. But many have worried that the South China Sea disputes would jeopardize the trade relations between China and ASEAN bloc. Professor Wang, are you worried?
Of course, some impact, but we cannot exaggerate the influence of that. For instance, the so-called the freedom of navigation, commercial meaning, no any problem. Even there are disputes always. So I think this is mutual benefit is not only in this region, but also for other stakeholders, including United States, Europeans. So everybody focus on trade, focus on stability, no problem. Bilateral dispute, as Chinese experience, we have 14 land neighbors, all bilateral negotiate, solve this problem, only remain in the China-Indian. So the territorial dispute in the maritime, also I think we can bilateral negotiate to solve this. No one can choose the case and then ask other countries like superpower to back and then to solve this problem. I don't think this is the way. I think the dispute with the Philippines after the government change, I think it will come down, and it is good for ASEAN and good for China-ASEAN relations.
Professor Heydarian, your thoughts on trade relations between China and ASEAN bloc?
Well, right. I think when it comes to economics, that's where the picture is brighter and much more hopeful. Despite the increased in tensions in the South China Sea, we see that trade relations between China and much of the ASEAN has been booming. And in recent years, you see that China is also becoming a much more important player in the infrastructure landscape, also in the landscape of overall investment in ASEAN. So I think it's important for us to make sure that the South China Sea disputes do not define our overall bilateral relationship, and we continue to cooperate in areas where we have common interests. And this is precisely the position that the incoming president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, is taking. In his opinion, it's important to make sure that we put aside the South China disputes and try to deal with them separately from the overall bilateral relationship between Philippines and China. I think Philippines and China is one of the few bilateral relationships in the ASEAN that has actually suffered as a result of the South China Sea dispute. So I think it's really the Philippines and China who have to do some improvements and to make sure that the disputes in the South China Sea will not affect their relations negatively. I'm very optimistic that with the new president in the Philippines, there will be more emphasis on how we can bring in more Chinese investments into the Philippines so that the Philippines could also develop and move to the next stage of economic development.
Professor Lim, what do you see the biggest potential on economic side between China and the ASEAN countries?
I think there are three very important points here. First of all, ASEAN and China already enjoys good trade relations. There are economic exchanges, as you have mentioned, between ASEAN and China is already a top trader, importer, exporter, or investor in some of the ASEAN countries. That's the first point. Second point, on 31st of December 2015, the ASEAN Economic Community was formed. And this allows ASEAN to have the ambitions to have a common market and also to have a common economy. And this is where China can come in to have more interactions with the ASEAN Economic Community. And the third important point is China itself has launched the One Belt, One Road policy and also has started the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB. And therefore, some countries have welcomed, and ASEAN on the whole has welcomed China's role in building infrastructure to increase connectivity in the region, whether it's through hardware like railroads or through people-to-people exchanges, through cultural programs, etc. So based on these 3 points, there is a positive aspect of ASEAN-China relations.
All right, and Professor Wang, Professor Heydarian just mentioned the bilateral ties between China and the Philippines are actually one that has suffered from the disputes in South China Sea. But are we going to see a recovery of diplomatic relations sometime between China and the Philippines, and also China and Vietnam?
Yes, I agree with that panelist that cooperation and trade, investment, this is all sides and hope. This is back to the original position of China. During the Deng Xiaoping period, the initiative that put aside the sovereignty dispute that joined to explore on these islands, ISIS, this is a good policy. So we should continue, not let the dispute jeopardize the cooperation and damage the trust and even the people's feeling. I think that China and the Philippines should have good relations in the future.
And you also mentioned the bilateral negotiation between China and claimant countries in the South China Sea. What do you say to critics that question whether China is using its economic leverage, to have a greater say in order to keep negotiation at a bilateral level? But to make it clear, China does apply this dual track system, which also involves a multilateral approach.
Again, give the example that the land dispute, when the collapse of the Soviet Union, all these new members, countries, they are smaller compared to China. But any territory dispute that China used the leverage of the economy to get more, I don't think any like this. So territory dispute should peaceful and equally negotiate, not in part by the third party and then to jeopardize the regional stability.